If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to MINDSHOCK True Crime. This is your host, Bruce McGuire, and you are listening to the Johnny Gosch series, the most extensive and comprehensive true crime podcast on the Johnny Gosch case, one of the most high-profile disappearances in history, one that has possibly been responsible for bringing to light, however late, the vast government corruption going on in upper political circles, trickling down through police departments, etc. I mean, this case truly is the precursor to all of the Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell insanity that's under the microscope now. But this back in the 80s, a lot of people were hardcore coincidence theorists back then and could never imagine that police were incompetent, let alone completely corrupt and complicit in active cover-ups. This is episode 6, The Attempted Abductions. A lot of people don't know that Johnny Gosch was not the only one that criminals went after. There was a slew of attempted abductions in the Des Moines area around this time. And then, of course, we do have the other two abductions, one of which was Eugene Martin, another paperboy. So what is going on in this area here? And why has all of this been suppressed? Nobody's talking about these other attempted abductions and what it means for the case as a whole. I mean, this is truly, truly mind-shocking stuff. As always, if you want to help support the MindShock podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell for notifications. Make sure you allow those notifications to come through. If you're still not getting them, just like and comment a lot more on a lot more videos. That seems to be the way the YouTube algorithm works. You could also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube for access to exclusive streams and chats. Like and share Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. So let's start this off with a very, very interesting post on the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit by West Kendall Jenner 6 years ago. A second look at Johnny Gosch and the mysterious failed abductions. So this is an update to this post about a string of failed abduction attempts that occurred in the Des Moines area between July 86 and September 89. And their potential to be connected to the disappearances of Johnny Gosch and Eugene Martin. Please read that one first if you haven't already, as this post is updating and building on info in the first one and won't make sense otherwise. So let's go to the first one here. Quite extensive stuff. Johnny Gosch and Eugene Martin cases possibly linked to a string of unsolved attempted abductions of newspaper carriers in 1980s Des Moines. Buckle up, this is going to be a long post. I'm working on a project about the presumed kidnapping of paperboys Johnny Gosch and Eugene Martin from Des Moines, Iowa in the early 80s, not giving much more details beyond that just yet. Going through newspaper archives, I uncovered some information that seemed to hint at a serial child predator stalking the Des Moines area, and that he may have been responsible for both abductions. I have never seen any of this info brought up on any discussion boards, documentaries, etc. I only found it under a virtual ton of newspaper articles. This surprised me because according to one article, police at the time suspected a connection between the two disappearances and some of the attempted kidnappings. I'm really curious to know what you guys think. And obviously not 100% of police officers in 100% of departments are going to be corrupt and or complicit in all of these cover-ups. There are good officers out there. So every now and then things slip through the cracks. So when you're looking at cases, you have to keep that in mind. Note, this post is approaching the case from an angle completely separate from the Franklin scandal, although it might not necessarily be separate on the surface. Who knows what lies beneath in this tangled web that is the Johnny Gosch case that stretches all the way to Washington, D.C. on one side and Bohemian Grove on the other. If you haven't checked out the previous episodes in the series, make sure to check those out. Brief background. 12-year-old Johnny Gosch went missing in the early morning hours, September 5th, 1982, while delivering newspapers in his neighborhood in West Des Moines, Iowa. His parents didn't know he was missing until 7 a.m. when customers began calling to ask where their newspapers were. Johnny's wagon full of undelivered papers was later found abandoned at the corner of 42nd Street and Marcourt Lane, about 320 meters from his home. On August 12th, 84, less than 2 years after Johnny disappeared, 13-year-old newspaper carrier Eugene Martin vanished while preparing for his delivery route sometime between 5:30 a.m. and 6 a.m. At about 7 a.m., a woman called his route manager saying she hadn't received her newspaper and asking if it was okay if she picked one up from the pile on the corner of 14th and Highview Street. The route manager alerted Gene's father 15 minutes later, and when the boy still hadn't returned home by 8:40, his father called the police. Police have never been able to conclusively link the two disappearances, but they believe that both boys were abducted. This was a very short summary, but I'm assuming most posters here are familiar with the case. For a more detailed refresher, you can read Johnny and Eugene's Charlie Project pages. Connected question mark. I believe that Johnny and Eugene were abducted by the same predator. Although there are discrepancies in the car and suspect descriptions, the circumstances seem to match almost perfectly. Here's a list of similarities I've identified. 1. They were about a year apart in age at the time of the disappearances. 2. They were both paper boys for the Des Moines Register. 3. They vanished on an early Sunday morning. 4. They went missing around the same time of year, August-September. In fact, Gene vanished only 3 weeks shy of the 2-year anniversary of Johnny's disappearance. 5. The abductions took place roughly 8 miles apart. 6. They occurred in quiet suburban low-crime neighborhoods. 7. Johnny's wagon and Gene's bag, both filled with undelivered papers, were found abandoned on street corners. 8. There were no signs of a struggle at either scene. 9, their disappearances went unnoticed until around 7 a.m. when customers began calling to ask where their newspaper was. 10, there's nothing to indicate that either boy ran away from home. Gene was going to turn 14 in less than a week and had plans to pick out a new bicycle with his dad. Johnny was described as a happy, responsible, well-adjusted boy who took his newspaper route very seriously. It is very unusual for a runaway, especially one that young, to run away and successfully stay hidden for such a long period of time. There have been no verified signs of life since the day they vanished, although that is highly disputed. Again, check out the previous episodes. No activity on their social security numbers, no indication that they ever tried to get a job or buy a car, nothing. 11, neither boy has been found. The attacks. Johnny and Eugene were not the only paper boys who were attacked back then. In fact, there was a string of attempted abductions of newspaper carriers in the Des Moines area in the 80s, which investigators at the time suspected were connected to Gosch and Martin. I've plotted all 7 events, the 2 disappearances, and 5 attempted abductions on a map. You can check it out here. There's also been some comments, again, I don't know if this is verified in any way, but there have been some commentators on YouTube videos and podcasts that also claim they were either attempted to be abducted or that they just saw a strange guy in a car following them and looking at them strangely and then just ran. Not that necessarily that an exact abduction was attempted, but all very, very suspicious. So the number of times that occurred could be a lot higher. But yes, on this map here, you can see that, they are all relatively within a small area. Very, very weird. So mostly Des Moines, West Des Moines, and in between, and also in Indianola? Huh. I must stress that none of these were officially tied to the 2 missing boys. It is also not known if the 5 attempted kidnappings were committed by the same person. Incident 1, July 10th, 86. 15-year-old Jim Polak, a carrier for the Des Moines Register, was out delivering papers on the morning of July 10th, 86, when he was grabbed by a man in a camouflage poncho. Jim managed to wrestle away from his assailant and then ran home and called the police. This occurred in the 500 block of 45th Street, only half a mile from where Johnny's wagon was found abandoned 3.5 years earlier. Jim told police he had been chased 6 weeks prior in a separate incident, but it is unknown if it was the same man who chased him on July 10th. So, this is all really weird. Again, if you haven't checked out the previous episodes, make sure you check them out. There was clearly some funny business regarding the Des Moines Register. There were actual individuals arrested for crimes with underage children, and it seems that it's a very real possibility that there were one or more individuals at the Des Moines Register who was specifically targeting paperboys. And in the case of Johnny, if you've looked at, if you're familiar with the case, if you checked out the previous episodes, Paul Bonacci also claims that he helped abduct Johnny, but also claimed that photographs were taken of Johnny and shown around to potential buyers, so these were targets. So this guy, Jim Polak, is saying, this kid, this 15-year-old, 15-year-old's not quite a young kid. There's some big 15-year-olds. Unfortunately, these guys aren't trying to abduct some Mike Tyson-type 15-year-olds. They would have gotten what they deserved in that situation. But, yeah, so if he was targeted, so there were 2 attempts on him, possibly by the same guy, possibly not. This is freaky stuff here. This is just so mind-shocking, though, because is this happening in other cities? This is the Des Moines area. Des Moines, West Des Moines. Are other cities and other states, are there paperboys being targeted for abductions? What is this? Incident 2, September 88. I do not have an approximate address for this particular event. The location on the map is not accurate. I have very limited information about this one. From what I've gathered, a boy between the ages of 10 and 13 was chased by a man while delivering papers in Indianola, less than 20 miles from Des Moines. The perpetrator in this case was driving a white van. This occurred 6 weeks prior to Incident 3, which would put the date as sometime in mid to late September. So these are all occurring around the fall. This is crazy. Incident 3, November 1st, 1988. At around 5 a.m., November 1st, 88, 10-year-old Mike Fackler was delivering newspapers for the Des Moines Register when a heavy-set man wearing a white jogging suit jumped out of his car and began to chase him. Mike ditched his bag and ran screaming to a neighbor's home where the owner pulled Mike inside the house and called the police. Police arrived at the home at 5:15 a.m. According to Des Moines Register, the man who tried to kidnap Mike matched the same physical description as the man in Incident 2. In both cases, the abductor drove a white vehicle, although it's called a car in Mike's case and a van in the Indianola case, which doesn't seem like a significant discrepancy considering this came from a 10-year-old boy who had just had a traumatic experience. You'd think that'd be clarified, however. Mike lived, he could be, the 10-year-old boy could be shown photos of a white van and a white car and kind of explain what he saw, but I guess there's no follow-up here. The police weren't interested in any kind of solving any of these. Mike lived roughly 2 miles from Johnny's home and less than 8 miles from Jean's. For what it's worth, Noreen Gosch believed the attempted abduction was connected to her son's disappearance, but Fackler's father doubted it. What's weird, though? On what credence is he doubting it? I could understand not knowing either way, but specifically doubting? Doubting would mean you're leaning in the direction of not related. How would he know? Incident 4, July 15th, 1989. Note, I am unable to find an approximate address for this event. The location plotted on the map is not accurate. On July 15th, 1989, yet another carrier for the Des Moines Register was almost abducted while delivering the morning paper. At 5:15 a.m., an unnamed 11-year-old noticed a white vehicle following him going the wrong way on a one-way street. The man got out of the car and began chasing him, screaming profanities and threatening to stab him if he didn't get in the car. He caught up to the boy and grabbed him by his sweatshirt, but the boy managed to wriggle out of the shirt and flee to a neighbor's home. The carrier told police his would-be kidnapper was in his 40s, about 6'2", had salt and pepper hair. He described the vehicle as a large white car with a red vinyl top. Now that's a terrifying account, and it's an 11-year-old too. Obviously not quite the same thing as a 13, 14, or 15-year-old, but Yeah, the 11-year-old luckily was able to get away. Man, these are terrifying accounts if you really think about them, whether they're related to other accounts or not. I mean, it's just terrifying. Incident 5, September 14th, 89. 11-year-old Melissa Gale was another carrier for the Des Moines Register. While delivering newspapers at about 6:20 a.m. on September 14th, 89. Yeah, these are all occurring around the fall. An unknown man in a blue car pulled up to her and ordered her to get in the car. Melissa turned around and ran to her father, who was helping deliver papers only a short distance away. And how lucky that is. Melissa said the man was white, late 20s, early 30s, large eyes and a large nose. He had a mole underneath his right eye. He drove a small, dark blue car, possibly a Chevrolet Chevette, with a beige-colored blanket in the back seat. The site of the attempted abduction is the 3500 block of Fleur Drive, less than 2 miles from Jean's home. I mean, that's also scary. And again, we do have this anomaly that this was the first time Johnny Gosch was going to deliver papers alone without his father. Now, obviously, Leonard Gosch, some people believe he had something to do with Johnny Gosch's disappearance, possibly that he sold him. I mean, there's all this strange information about him being taken to some kind of Air Force base in the weeks prior, and the strange phone calls Noreen Gosch describes overnight. And then, of course, that was supposedly the first time he was to go without his father, and he is kidnapped that time. Wow. Yeah, this is just completely terrifying that some scumbags here, they're just going after specifically mail carriers. I mean, Mark Allen, I believe, is the only one in the area that's possibly connected to all this who was not a mail carrier, although maybe they thought he was. It's possible they thought he was. Or possibly if they're all targeted and there's photographs, maybe he was mistaken for another one who was, and they were targeting him and he looked close to him. A serial child predator. The possibility of a serial predator targeting children in the Des Moines area is not a new theory. The Des Moines Register reported on July 17th, 1989, that the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, the DCI, suspected a connection between the recent Indianola cases and both Johnny and Eugene's disappearances. Wow. So this was officially referenced that they're all connected. The DCI, which normally wouldn't get involved in a seemingly routine local crime, was so suspicious of a link that they began investigating the July 15th, 1989 attack themselves. And who knows what other information they have, particularly about some kind of corruption within the Des Moines Register and police departments. Mike Fackler and the 2 Indianola paperboys encounters all took place within a 10-month period, between September 88 and July 89. In all 3, the perpetrator drove a large white vehicle. Mike's attacker reportedly matched the physical description of the perpetrator in the September 1988 event. And what are the chances that Indianola, a city with less than 11,000 residents in the 80s, would suddenly have 2 cases of a man with a white car chasing paperboys within the space of a year? The only difference between Mike's case and the other 2 has to do with the date. Mike's occurred on a weekday in November as opposed to a weekend in the summer or early fall. Unfortunately, because the physical description isn't publicly available in these 2 incidents, I am unable to say if it's consistent with the description provided in the July 89 attack, that being a 6'2" man in his 40s with graying hair. But even if the connection isn't as clear, it's not a far reach to suggest that whoever chased the paperboy in Indianola in September 88 is probably the same one who struck in July 89. The circumstances, timing, similar car, and the fact that they both occurred in the same small city all point to that. Let's look at this Indianola predator. How similar are his crimes to the abductions of Johnny and Eugene? 1. All incidents involved boys between the ages of 10 and 13. 2. 4 delivered papers for the Des Moines Register. It is unclear who the 5th, the boy chased in the September 88 attack, worked for. Is it possible he also did and they just didn't state that? Or a paperboy for somebody else? 3, with the exception of Mike Fackler, all were attacked in the summer months. 4, with the exception of Mike Fackler, all occurred on weekends. 5, I mean, isn't that yeah? I mean, yeah. 5 all occurred in the early morning hours. 6, the suspects in the Gosch and Martin cases were in their mid-30s to early 40s. This would be consistent with the Indianola predator described as 40 to 45 in 88-89. This leads us to a disturbing realization. If the 2 disappearances and the Indianola incidents are not related, this means that there was not 1 but 2 serial child predators in Des Moines back then, or simply a big ring. So it was the same ring with multiple people involved. That could also be a possibility. And that, I think, is even more terrifying than the idea of 1 single predator. Yes, it is. As for Jim and Melissa, I'm really not sure what to make of their encounters. Jim was the oldest victim at 15 and is the only case where the suspect tried to conceal their identity and apparently didn't have a car. What? However, the fact that Jim was accosted only half a mile from Johnny's home is a coincidence I find really hard to ignore. I really wish I had more details on this one. I am inclined to think Melissa's case is separate from the others. She's the only female victim, and the perpetrator appeared significantly younger. Late 20s or early 30s as opposed to 40 to 45. I included her in the list primarily because of how close she was to the site of Eugene's abduction. And again, if this is a ring and then they're selling people, I mean, obviously they could be selling girls as well as boys, so yeah, it's weird. I was unable to find any articles about the cluster of attacks after the final one in September 89. Police have more or less stuck to the theory that Johnny and Eugene were abducted by a lone predator. They investigated a multitude of child predators, including serial murderers Bob Berdella and John Joubert, but eventually ruled them out. And I will be doing a Bob Berdella podcast that was requested. That's coming up as well. So yeah, what do you guys think? I worry that I'm finding connections where there aren't any and would love some outside perspectives. Colonel Dredd posted this in response. The idea of 2 men working in tandem for the abduction of underage victims is far from fiction. In Halifax, Nova Scotia, a few years back, there was a case where 2 men abducted a boy off the streets, took him out to a cabin outside of town, forcefully confined him, and were assaulting him for weeks. The boy later escaped and alerted the authorities. It was discovered in the following legal proceedings. The pair were on the run and were found in a northern part of Ontario hiding out. One of them had passed away because of health complications. That a third man had been contacted after the child had been abducted. That man traveled down to the cabin and met with the other 2 for the evening, the details of which weren't disclosed, but fairly easy to surmise. It's far from outrageous to assume that there could have been 2 offenders operating in the area at the same time of these disappearances. Foxfire posted this. Also consider a Kenneth Parnell, Irvin Murphy type situation where the pedophile enlists an accomplice to help with the abduction but who is not involved in anything after that point. Another post here, which is really interesting. Both the Des Moines Register and law enforcement checked employees who quit shortly before or after Johnny disappeared. The employees would have been the first people police checked besides the family because they would have been familiar with the routes and how they worked. Johnny's mother, Noreen, actually had a specific Des Moines Register employee in mind, saying he resembled the composite sketch of a suspect in Johnny's case, and that he suddenly quit without picking up his paycheck. However, one of the Des Moines Register's lawyers said that the man actually left the newspaper about 1.5 months before Johnny disappeared, and that the FBI interviewed him and eventually cleared him. Noreen conceded that the man had an alibi from his wife or girlfriend, but said she was not satisfied that this man had nothing to do with it. I'm assuming she doesn't think that anymore, though. So a few weird things here. So if there is some cover-up, obviously the Des Moines Register's lawyers would say that, or spin it, or alter paperwork, or whatever, if they were paid handsomely to do so, if there is some kind of complicity or corruption here. And also, a lot of goofs out there, even so-called true crime aficionados, hallucinate that just because someone was cleared or stated that they were cleared, a lot of times law enforcement, be it FBI or otherwise, they'll say someone is cleared to either get them to relax or see what they're going to do after the fact. So, yeah, there's a lot of different tactics involved there. So the goofs that hallucinate that just because someone was supposedly officially cleared, that means they had nothing to do with it. I mean, that's weird, especially when so many cases are unsolved. So, yeah, that's a weird one. A follow-up here, very astute by user since deleted. Unfortunately, women give their husbands false alibis all too often. Seems to be murderers and rapists sometimes have dysfunctional marriages in which the female is completely under their control, so sometimes alibis by partners are not that great. I actually cringe when I hear some of these alibis. Quote, he hadn't moved to that state yet, end quote. So, people can travel. He was working. So, people get lunch breaks and plenty of other reasons to leave work for a while. He was with his wife. So, partners are the most likely to lie. A very, very astute post there. A lot of goofs out there. They can't fathom that, not all alibis are equal. M. Galinsky responded with this: our film, Who Took Johnny, definitely comes from the Franklin angle, but it does include information about Eugene Martin and Mark Allen. In the list above of similarities, one thing that you left out was that both of the fathers were in the military. That's actually curious because not only that, but Leonard Gosch took Johnny Gosch to an Air Force base, supposedly. In weeks before. I mean, it's kind of weird. In the film, when we interviewed the police, they stated that the crimes were not connected and that the only connection was their gender. It took a while for us to find distribution for it, but it is now on iTunes and Amazon. The film is largely structured from the point of view of Noreen Gosch. We understand that many people are skeptical. The film is not meant to be an argument about what happened, but instead to present a lot of what did, not all by any means, and what was discussed in a narrative format with Noreen as the main character. One of the things that has often been described as debunked is the idea that the pictures that Noreen received were declared to be a different set of boys from Florida. We spoke with Detective Zalvis, and he only knew one of the photos. It's one that doesn't look like the others, and he had not seen any of the others. There was a recent article on Medium that took issue with the inclusion of this information, stating that Zalva recalled it as innocent child's play. However, in the film, which the article was based on, Zalva states very clearly that as soon as he saw the pictures, he knew it was a pedophile, but that none of the kids would admit that anything had happened. More info about the film at whotookjohnny.com. And we also actually went into that, and supposedly Zalva did apologize for all of this. And so, yeah, because a lot of goofs hallucinate that was all debunked. I mean, that's like the favorite word of coincidence theorists, debunked, when obviously it was not. So, Experience posted this: you have done a truly remarkable job in researching these incidences. However, by ruling out any connections to the Franklin scandal in nearby Omaha, you are ignoring a few important points. Although it's been some time since I studied Franklin and the Johnny Gosch abduction, I'll try to go by what I remember. 1. Paul Bonacci, a key figure in Franklin, was actually in the car driven by the abductors of Johnny Gosch. Paul was only a little boy at the time, but remembered enough details about Gosch's appearance when he was abducted, details that had never been released to the public, that his story made believers of Gosch's parents when Paul first spoke with them years later. 2. As I remember, the abductors of Gosch were much more organized than the perp in the later attempted abductions you cite. The way that Bonacci described Gosch's abduction, there was no way that he could have escaped, as did the later ones. Bonacci said that the abductors lured Gosch so close to their vehicle that they literally snatched him into the car. They were too calculating to get into a situation where they would need to chase after or struggle with the victim, as you described happened in later attempted abductions. 3. The fact that the first 2 incidents were successful abductions while all the later ones were failed attempts suggests that there was at least 2 abductors at work here. Criminals, like everyone else, generally get better at their job over time, not worse. That the first 2 incidents occurred successfully and without a hitch means that in these 2 cases the perp knew what he was doing, possibly from past experience. The perp in the later attempts was clearly disorganized. This clearly shows a regression in criminal ability over time. The criminal world or otherwise, doesn't generally work that way. Well, unless, of course, if there is a ring and they have multiple people working for them, they might have outsourced some of these because it's getting too risky, or they're becoming elevated because if they committed these earlier abductions, they got big payouts, so now they're hiring underneath them other people to do abductions for them where they don't care if they failed, because if those abductors get caught, oh well. But if they succeed and deliver the children, they can sell them and share the profit. So that's a possibility. Also, if some of these were drug users, again, depending on how high they were, that could also influence success. 4, there seems to be at least 2 perps at work here. Doesn't rule out that all of these incidents were connected. According to the Franklin scheme, both perps could have been working for the same gang of child abductors. Yes, good point there. 5, you neglect to consider that the series of assaults on news carriers in Des Moines ended almost exactly at the same time that the Franklin Credit Union was exposed in nearby Omaha, Nebraska. Coincidence? I doubt it. That's an interesting point. The timeline with Franklin blowing wide open. That is curious. All of a sudden, no more abductions, or attempts. That's interesting. So let's circle back to the original post here. There's been some progress in the rabbit hole since the first post in June, which is the one we just went over, which I wanted to share with you guys. Newspapers.com recently posted 2 new articles from Iowa City Press-Citizen, which provide more details on some of the attempted abductions. And the interactive map of the case, which I highly recommend using, has been updated. Sources and footnotes are here. Most of this post is updates on previous information or things I didn't catch the first time around, but there's one clue in particular that really jumped out and which I believe deserves more attention. The fact that a second newspaper carrier was attacked on the same street Johnny Gosch was abducted from 4 years earlier. September 5th, 82, 12-year-old Johnny Gosch disappeared while preparing for his delivery route in the early morning hours of September 5th, 82. Accompanied by his dachshund puppy, Gretchen, he left his home just after 5:45 a.m., cut through the neighbor's yard, and walked the 2 blocks east to pick up his newspapers at the corner of 42nd and Ashworth. When he got to the corner, he was stopped by a man wearing a baseball cap and sitting in a late model blue car next to the newspaper drop who wanted to know how to get to 86th Street, 20 blocks away. Johnny gave him directions, and the man made a U-turn onto Ashworth Road and drove off. A few minutes later, as Johnny chatted with his teenage friend Mike at the paper drop, the man passed by and parked at the corner again. This time, he leaned out the passenger side window and asked the kids collectively how to get to 86th Street. After trying and failing again to give him directions, Johnny approached John Rossi, an adult neighbor who had been picking up newspaper bundles for his 3 sons. "Can you help? He wants to know where 86th Street is," he asked. Rossi went to go help the driver, and Johnny returned to his friend Mike and said something to the effect of, "That man is really weird." We're actually getting some new information here. I don't remember going over these details before. In fact, his behavior was so odd that John Rossi believed he was on drugs. This guy was high, he told the Des Moines Register in 83. "When you're drunk, you're drowsy." He was wide awake, and I could see his beady eyes staring into the horizon. This is where things start to get really murky. As Rossi talked to the driver, Johnny loaded the papers into his wagon and began walking up 42nd Street. Rossi concluded his conversation with the man, who now seemed agitated, and slid back into the driver's seat to leave. Inexplicably, he flicked his dome lights on and off 3 times before turning around the corner and tearing off like a bat out of hell eastbound on Ashworth. He drove 3 blocks before turning onto 39th Street and bolting north. Very shortly after this, a 15-year-old newspaper carrier saw a tall man walk out from the shadows between 2 houses and towards Johnny from behind as the boy approached the corner at Marcourt Lane. Johnny reached the end of the block and crossed the street to park his wagon at 42nd and Marcourt, where he usually left it while delivering to Frank Crest Circle. A neighbor looking out from his upstairs windows watched as a silver Ford Fairmont with a black stripe rolled up to the corner. But due to where his house was situated, the car blocked Johnny from view. It is unclear whether Johnny was just approaching the corner or sitting in his wagon when the car pulled up. According to some sources, the witness later turned away but heard a car door slam, looked out his window to see what it was, and saw the car drive off. When the car left the corner, Johnny was gone. Nobody knows exactly when Johnny disappeared, but the alarm wasn't raised until about 7:45 a.m. when a neighbor called Johnny's father, John Gosch, to ask where the paper was. This immediately struck Gosch as odd. Johnny had a reputation as a responsible, punctual carrier and had never skipped work once in the year he had been delivering for the Des Moines Register. Thinking he overslept, Gosch went to check his room only to find it empty and then notice that the family dog Gretchen had returned home alone. He began to search the neighborhood for Johnny and quickly found his wagon abandoned at the corner of 42nd and Marcourt with his newspaper bundle inside. Not one of the 37 papers had been delivered. Concerned, but not yet alarmed enough to call the police, Gosch picked up the papers and delivered them himself before going to search the neighborhood more thoroughly. At 8:30 a.m., after being unable to find him for 45 minutes after receiving the call from the neighbor, Gosch called the police to report his son missing. I don't know. Does anybody find that strange if Leonard John Gosch is not connected to his son's disappearance in any way? Knowing that his son was that responsible, why would he not be alarmed? I mean, if there was a tendency for him to be late, not deliver papers, all these things, then maybe. But if he was that punctual and responsible, how is he not alarmed that the wagon with the papers is there, not a single paper delivered, and no Johnny, and the dog came home alone? I mean, is that not a call for alarm? Between July 10th, 86 and September 14th, 89, 5 newspaper carriers in the Des Moines area reported being chased by strange men on their early morning delivery routes. Some of the earlier articles about Johnny's disappearance include an unnamed mother whose 10-year-old son was bothered by a man before September 5th, 82. According to this woman, her son was delivering papers in the early morning near Johnny's home when the guy drove up and began saying things to him. The nature of these comments is unknown, but they disturbed the boy enough that he ran across several yards to get away from the man. There are so few details that it can't even be classified as an attempted abduction, which is why it hasn't been added to the list. Although obviously we don't know what would have happened if the boy didn't run away. Also, there are 2 things to add to the list of similarities between Johnny and Eugene's disappearance. Both boys were kidnapped the first time they went out to deliver papers alone, and both their fathers were in the military. Whoa, hold on a second. I don't remember going over that in Eugene Martin's disappearance. Was that known? Was that in the articles in the previous episodes? That was also Eugene's first time alone? Huh. That's kind of weird. That's really weird. And of course, the military connections. The Indianola attacks. 2 of these incidents occurred in Indianola, less than 20 miles from Des Moines. In each case, which took place 10 months apart in September 88 and July 89, a male Des Moines register carrier between the ages of 10 and 13 was chased by a man driving a white van with a dark vinyl top. There is very little information about the first one, but the second one bore enough similarities to the disappearances of Johnny and Eugene that police requested the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation to step in to see if they could be related. In an unusual move, the DCI agreed to get involved in the apparently routine local case. But the results of this inquiry is unknown. What a coincidence. According to a recently posted 89 article from the Iowa City Press Citizen, 2 other register carriers were chased last year by men who have never been identified. This almost certainly refers to incidents 2 and 3 from the first post, which occurred in September and November 88 respectively, and seems to confirm that the boy in the September Indianola incident delivered for the Des Moines Register. This means all 7 kids worked for the same paper. Of course, this is the Des Moines area, so it's not super weird, but still really interesting nonetheless. Well, of course, there were, it's not like it's the only newspaper. Obviously, there's other newspapers as well. The blue car implicated in Johnny's case bore Warren County license plates. Indianola, the city 20 miles from Des Moines that saw the attempted kidnappings of 2 male newspaper carriers, which the assistant director of the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation said bore curious similarities to the disappearances of Johnny and Eugene, is in Warren County. Mike Fackler. There is now more information available on the third incident, the attempted abduction of 10-year-old Mike Fackler. According to Mike's father, Steve, Mike was walking past the apartment buildings on Alice Avenue at 5 a.m. November 1st, 88, when a white car pulled up in the nearby parking lot close to him. A heavy-set man wearing a white jogging suit got out of the vehicle and began to chase after Mike, who dropped his newspaper bag to the ground and bolted to his neighbor's home. However, a recently posted article published November 4th, 88, quotes a police official who said the following, quote, "There was no indication in our interview that he was actually chased." Clive Police Detective Jerry Miller said, "He was walking by the apartment building when a car pulls into the first stall. A guy got out and jogged to the sign. The boy stopped and he panicked. He said it didn't seem similar to the case of Johnny Gosch and the West Des Moines paperboy who was 12 when he disappeared in 82 while delivering newspapers. So that obviously throws the events of November 1st, 88 into question. For what it's worth, Noreen Gosch believed Mike's case was related to Johnny's and said police should take it more seriously, although Mike's own father and 2 Clive police detectives believed the two were unrelated. All 4 of the articles about the attempted abductions published after November 4th continued to cite this as an actual attempt and not an overreacting paperboy. This one will probably remain a mystery unless more information resurfaces or by some miracle Mike himself finds this post and decides to reach out. There's one coincidence that deserves a quick mention. The driver of the blue car had asked Johnny and the other carriers how to get to 86th Street. 86th Street is in Clive, and Mike was attacked in a neighborhood that's along 86th Street. In fact, the approximate spot is less than 1,000 feet from the road. Okay, this is all kind of weird. If the police are trying to sweep this under the rug, obviously they would try to downplay any event of a chase. Oh, he wasn't actually chasing the kid. He just happened to be jogging in his exact direction. I mean, here's the part where intuition comes into play. Yes, obviously the kid could be mistaken. But what natural instinct caused that kid to flee? And why would an adult just start randomly jogging directly towards a kid? You would think they would either smile or go off to this. I mean, how often does someone park a car and make a beeline towards a young child delivering newspapers? I mean, it's kind of weird. The police explanation doesn't really hold a lot of weight. I mean, obviously Mike himself should clarify on this. I mean, there's just so many coincidences here. And the insistence that it's not related, even by Mike's own father. I mean, okay, if this kid routinely thinks adults are trying to abduct him and run towards him when they're not, then okay. If this kid has done this a bunch of times with random adults all over the place, then that would be good reason for the father to say, oh, it's probably not related because he does this all the time. We were just at the mall and somebody was just jogging in our direction and he thought he was trying to abduct him and he just ran away. So if this is something this kid does all the time, okay then. But if this is the only time it's ever happened, then that's weird. And did the police kind of let the father know that he should make comments that it's not related? Obviously, we have no way of knowing that. Okay, continuing on here, the most important finding, Jim Polak. Remember Jim, the 15-year-old register carrier who was ambushed by a man in a camo poncho while delivering papers half a mile from Johnny's home? While reading the account of his attack again, I realized there was a mistake. In the first post, I'd written that the incident occurred in the 500 block of 45th Street, but it actually happened in the 500 block of 42nd Street. I clicked over to the map to fix the location, dragged Jim's marker over to 42nd Street, and noticed that the spot lined up near perfectly with the cluster of marks just above it. And that's when it hit me. That's the same street that Johnny was abducted from. Did Johnny's kidnapper strike twice on the same street nearly 4 years apart? There are certainly several similarities between the two crimes. Both victims were attacked on their early morning delivery route while working for the Des Moines Register. Jim's encounter came just 3 years, 10 months after Johnny's kidnapping. Although Jim was attacked on a Thursday and Johnny on a Sunday, it was roughly the same time of day. They're pretty close in age. Jim was 15, Johnny was just 2 months from turning 13. They happened half a mile away on the same street. Because the details of Johnny's disappearance are so convoluted and there are 3 different strangers to consider, there isn't really a way to compare the perpetrators' MOs. Jim being attacked from behind would be consistent with the eyewitness's account of a tall man walking out of the shadows and towards Johnny from behind. But that's not good evidence when you have 2 other suspects to consider. It's also not unprecedented for a serial offender to strike more than once in the same small area. For example, the original Night Stalker repeatedly targeted the same neighborhoods, often assaulting women only doors down from previous victims. Having successfully abducted a child in the neighborhood previously, whoever took Johnny may have felt comfortable enough to try it again a second time in the same area, especially 4 years later when people's guards are down. You know what's crazy, too? I don't know if I mentioned this. How many other attempted abductions were not reported? Like, again, let's just say it was somebody cruising, eyeing someone strangely, and the kid felt uncomfortable and maybe darted away or ran away and never reported it. I mean, it's kind of chilling just to even think about how many more times something like that could have happened. My opinion. I want to be very clear. My intent is not to set out and prove that any or all of these are connected, but to bring attention to another avenue of exploration that warrants a second look. The fact that another boy was apparently grabbed on the same street just under 4 years after Johnny is highly suspect and deserves to be revisited. If Johnny and Eugene were snatched by the same predator, or predators, which I believe to be the case, then it makes sense that they wouldn't be the only two victims. Part of me wonders if this may even be a Danny James Heinrich type situation where you have a serial predator who assaults multiple victims but only kills once or twice due to extreme circumstances. Based on the information that's available, I think Melissa Gale is probably unrelated to the others. She is the lone female victim, and the suspect in her encounter appeared much younger than the men in the other cases. Well, I mean, how many men were there, though? If there were 3 or 4, one of them could be younger. As for Mike, it looks like his encounter was probably a standalone incident as well, although I'm hesitant to rule him out just yet. There's a decent chance that Jim Polak and or the other 2 boys who were chased in Indianola are connected to Johnny and Eugene. I waffle back and forth between thinking Johnny was abducted by a single predator and thinking there was more than one person involved. When you analyze the events of that morning, some of them sound a little too perfectly timed for it to happen organically, such as the man on foot showing up about the same time as the silver Ford Fairmont pulled up on the corner of 42nd and Marquardt. Was the man in the blue car signaling to someone else when he flicked his dome lights on and off? Is he the proverbial red herring and it was the guy on foot who grabbed Johnny from behind and forced him into the silver Ford Fairmont that had just pulled up to the corner? The presence of an accomplice would make sense of some of the odder details. How often does a random guy ask for directions not once but twice and be really weird about it and then someone gets abducted right after? I mean, again, theoretically, it is possible it's not related, but that's just weird. If you made it this far, thanks so much for reading. I really look forward to hearing your guys' thoughts. What do you think? One of the articles from the Des Moines Register, September 7th, 82, is actually titled, "Nothing is Ruled Out So Far in Hunt for Missing Boy 12. Another coincidence here, Johnny was taken September 5th, 82. Eugene was snatched August 12th, 84. 1 year, 11 months after Johnny. Jim Polak was attacked on July 10th, 86, which is also about 1 year, 11 months after Eugene. Just another creepy coincidence. An interesting post here by Kangaroo 1974. One question regarding Melissa, the female newspaper carrier who reported an abduction attempt when she was 11 years old. Any chance she had short hair and could have been mistaken for a male? If a car pulled up next to her and the driver saw her only from behind, maybe he thought she was a boy and is related to the other abduction attempts. I had short hair around the same age and was often mistaken for a boy by strangers. Interesting point also. So this brings us all back to Yellow Bag and the alleged attempted abduction before that of Johnny Gosch. Now, we did go over the Millhouse allegations and, of course, the Faded Out podcast, rather inaccurate. From Cav Def, I went over this before, but just really quick. Information was shared by Yellowbag on the Iowa Cold Case page for Johnny Gosch beginning September 5th, 2016, the 31st anniversary of the abduction. Faded Out interviews with Yellowbag as well as a former Des Moines Register circulation manager and Yellowbag's purported mother. Events that morning, several major controversies have arisen over the events of the morning that Johnny was abducted. Was Johnny at Ashworth that morning, or did witnesses mistake another paperboy for him? Did a tall man follow Johnny, or whoever the boy was, after he picked up his papers on Ashworth? Were there 2 separate cars, blue car at Ashworth, silver Ford Fairmont at Marquardt, or just one blue car? Did the Boson brothers, Kevin and Mark, see Johnny slumped over his wagon as they passed by him on Marquardt? Is it true that P.J. Smith saw Johnny being forced into the car and was forced by Orville Cooney to suppress his witness account? Was there a van parked several blocks away that a witness saw an object wrapped in a blanket get transferred into from another car? So, Mike Seskis and John Rossi were both at 42nd and Ashworth that morning, and both were adamant they saw Johnny. Chris Bierge asserting that Johnny really picked up his papers at Marquardt, not Ashworth. This was entirely uncorroborated until the non-credible Leonard John Gosch endorsed Chris's story despite never having challenged it in the past. Even then, Leonard admitted that Johnny did normally get his papers on Ashworth. Neighbor Lawrence Headland heard someone pulling a wagon through his backyard on the morning of the kidnapping, just as Leonard John Gosch admitted Johnny usually did. Seskis was a friend, and Rossi saw the boy had a wagon and dog with him, which no other paper boys besides Johnny did. Insinuation, which first suggested that Chris first suggested and Sarah tried leading Matt Seskis into, that Mike Seskis was fed a false story about the tall man coming out to follow Johnny. Numerous press accounts describing two separate cars. By 88, Noreen, in Popular Magazine People, not the mainstream press that some like Leonard have claimed Bonacci read while in prison, mentioned only a single blue car at both places. In the 85 Senate hearing where the Gosches shared the map of the immediate neighborhood containing the summaries of witness accounts. Rather implausibly, Sarah repeatedly dismissed the idea that the same car could have driven around the block to meet Johnny on Marquardt. Bosens retracted their account of seeing Johnny slumped on his wagon to Chris. March 6, 83, news article, Leonard John Gosch in 84, the above neighborhood sketch, and Noreen in 92 all mentioned two paperboys seeing Johnny slumped over his wagon before Noreen finally named them in her book as the Bosen brothers. By their own admissions, the Bosens were in the right place at the right time. P.J. Smith also denied to Chris his alleged disclosures to Noreen about witnessing the abductions. Based on the geographical details that Noreen mentioned, the van was near the intersection 42nd and Woodland. Coincidentally or not, this is where Chris Bierge picked up his papers, raising the question of whether he saw something he shouldn't have and got similar treatment to what P.J. Smith allegedly faced. So yeah, there's a lot of problems with the Faded Out podcast, but just a summary of Yellow Bag's comments. Trumplet77 posted this on Reddit. He says he was also approached while working as a paperboy for the same paper as Johnny. He reported it to the police when he heard about the Johnny Gosch case, but the police never followed it up. Even more interestingly, he said that a guy named Wilbur Milhouse, who became his duty manager at the paper, liked to give the paper boys beer and money. He said that one time at a party Milhouse had organized for the paper boys, he saw him talking to the very guy who'd approached him in his car. It turns out that Milhouse was convicted of abusing young boys in 87. Surely this is too much of a coincidence. A pedophile who happened to be working at the paper at the time who had contact with paper boys? I mean, he could be talking nonsense, but it seems legit. Wilbur Milhouse had 2,200 people's names in a book and said he was trying to recruit paper boys. Was Johnny and Eugene's name in this book? That's actually curious. Yellowbag posted this September 26th, 2022. The man who tried to abduct me in 82 was driving a Ford Fairmont, not a Chevy Nova. I remember the two rectangular headlights, which I see online was standard for the Fairmont Futura that came out in 78. The car was covered with snow, but I remember it as white or maybe two-tone white and gray. Funny thing, I went out east for college in 86 and had a girlfriend who drove an old Fairmont. It creeped me out every time I saw her car coming because I remembered the evil dude who tried to get me into the same kind of car 4 years earlier. It's hard to remember a lot of details 40 years after the fact, but I don't think Joubert would have been old enough to be the man who tried to abduct me. I'm guessing the abductor was at least 25 years old. The thing I remember the most is his orange and blue reflective jacket and the way he kept looking in his rearview mirror to see if anyone saw him talking to me. He did not look like the photo of Wintz at all or John Rossi's sketch of the guy at 42nd and Ashworth the morning Johnny was kidnapped. Dark hair, angry dark eyes, well-trimmed mustache, Caucasian and accent like he was from somewhere out east. I actually met Sam Soda through the Faded Out podcast and had lunch with him. Anyone who thinks Sam was involved is barking up the wrong tree. Yes, Sam could brag and tell some stories, but he came across to me as a guy with a big heart. Sam thought the kidnapper was a total lone wolf. If he partnered with anyone, someone would have ratted him out for reward. And that's interesting. If this is all a setup by Yellowbag, or possibly just Yellowbag being deceived by Sam Soda and some of these other scumbags to tout a certain narrative, is that how they would do it? Yellowbag followed up. Sam talked to criminals, pedophiles, and even mafia types. He came up with exactly nothing. His final thoughts were that only one man kidnapped Johnny, not a group of men. If it were a group, someone would have talked by now. Like Bonacci. Sam also believed the man was probably connected with the Des Moines Register. I do not know if Milhouse was physically present. He was, though, repeatedly claiming to know who took Johnny and why from the day Johnny was kidnapped. Milhouse became angry and visibly agitated every time he talked about Johnny. I have no doubt he was involved, but I have never figured out to what extent. Milhouse probably had dozens of victims. He received a 30-year sentence for sexually abusing 6 teens. And I still think the key to solving Johnny's disappearance is for one of those victims to reveal the identity of the Fairmont man. Someone who knew Milhouse knows who that man is. Someone asked if Yellowbag had a photo of the man who tried to get into his Fairmont. He did not respond to that. Some posts here. This is all from iowacoldcases.org under case summaries in the comment section. Tri-State Girl posted this. Local pedophiles who could have come in contact with Johnny Milhouse specifically and faded out. And on this site, Yellowbag talks about how Milhouse said Johnny was taken because he couldn't keep his mouth shut. The paper really messed up, letting 2 pedophiles work with kids. Milhouse had already been charged while working at the paper in the 70s. Sikora had been in the same home his brother molested kids in during the 70s as well. Then Sikora was busted in the 80s as a pedophile himself. There was also a pedophile ring in Des Moines that was busted in the 80s. Other men that, as far as I know, weren't attached to the register, but maybe they knew Kenneth. There were also attempted kidnappings from 86 to 89. I don't know what to make of those because Milhouse, a prime suspect, was already in jail. Maybe Kenneth was having his go at it. A lot of this is lost in time since all of these men are dead now. Another interesting post by Tri-State Girl here. Yellowbag hadn't made his comments on here yet. However, there were articles from the 80s about Milhouse, Sikora, the guy at the mall, and the pedophile ring in Des Moines that was busted. Another post by Yellowbag here. Wilbur Milhouse and Frank Sikora, 2 former Des Moines Register employees, were both convicted of sexually abusing teen boys in the 80s. Milhouse told me several times that he knew who took Johnny and why. Last fall, I found a photo of the man who approached me in a Ford Fairmont in 82. And guess what? He was a Des Moines Register employee. I think the key is solving Johnny's disappearance is to find former victims of Register employees and ask them exactly what they remember hearing around the time of Johnny's disappearance. I know the odds are against it, but I'm wondering if any former victims read this website and be willing to speak out. Milhouse and Sikora had at least 7 victims that they were charged with abusing, but they may have had dozens more who never said a word about what happened to them. Here's another interesting post about, wow, this is really creepy, by Bob. I was 17 in 82. Not much contact with Wilbur except softball team. I was more late 70s, early 80s. The phone calls, the $100 bills, the creepy kids, all too familiar. Are you a TRHS area? I'm not a victim. I was approached by a large man on foot while delivering, asking where the party was at. Where can a guy get some action and that sort of stuff? I can remember saying something like, how would I know I'm only 13? I kept my distance as he followed on foot for about a block, at which point I dropped everything and ran like hell 2 blocks home. Today, I still say I could have been Johnny. True story. Wow. So he doesn't say the year here, but presumably this is before Johnny. So this, I mean, how many of these unreported cases are there, or cases they're only reported after the fact? Yellowbag responded, I was an East High student when I met Milhouse in 82. When my family moved, I applied for a paper route in the 4 Mile area. I got a creepy phone call from someone who knew the schools I had attended and described where items were located in my bedroom. There was a wooded vacant lot next to my house, and he apparently had watched me there with binoculars. I am sure now that it was Milhouse. Did Milhouse ever say anything to you about Johnny Gosch? Do you know anyone that Milhouse hung out with? Do you know anyone Milhouse sexually abused? The DM Register rehired Wilbur Milhouse in 1978 after he had been arrested for sexual abuse in 75. As someone said, quote, they had to have known about Milhouse because his arrest was in their own damn paper, end quote. Wow. I mean, that's insane. Anybody who thinks the Des Moines Register is innocent in all of this, I mean, this is crazy stuff. JeebZ1 posted this. The Fred that Chris referred to in the Faded Out podcast is Fred Freeland Sayer. He was a known Chester in the Des Moines area that worked at the piano store at the mall and died in 1994 from a gunshot wound once he relocated to Missouri. Not saying that this guy was the Emilio, just saying that he's one of many people that could have been a potential suspect, and I'm sure at some point he was on the police's radar. Just think of how many hundreds of people it could have been that are known Chesters. Then think of the many Chesters that are unknown or were unknown and have died since then. It's literally impossible to tie anyone to Johnny Gosch's kidnapping or Eugene Martin's kidnapping without evidence and witness accounts that could positively ID a license plate, or someone for a certain or someone to lead them to the remains and then do DNA testing. Yes, Johnny and Eugene were both paper boys and they were both kidnapped. But then think of all the attempted kidnappings that almost happened but didn't. For years, I thought the cases were tied together, and they very well could still be because there are many similarities. Both on a Sunday, both paper boys, both around the same age, etc. But the more years go by in this case, the more I'm beginning to understand why law enforcement couldn't tie the cases together. The only one saying Johnny and Eugene and then Mark Allen's cases were tied together was Noreen in her book. The whole, not just her, the whole Sam Soda alerting Noreen that there was going to be another abduction in 84, then Eugene Martin was kidnapped, that whole thing was from Noreen. Noreen said in the book that Soda told her. Sam has denied it, and there is absolutely no proof, no recorded call, nothing concrete that shows that Sam did alert Noreen before Eugene Martin's kidnapping. If she could put a WAV file or MP3 of that convo on her website, I'd believe it all day long, and it could be true, but I'm just saying there's no proof. There was supposedly a police... I went over this in previous episodes. There was a police detective that supposedly corroborated that, but again, who knows how the tape went missing, etc. Is there a copy of the tape? I mean, these are all curiosities. But it is curious that in the years since, Noreen seems to be substantiated by many different police officers and detectives over the years. So that is curious, because years ago, when it was impossible to know or corroborate, like, Noreen keeps getting vindicated as time goes by. I mean, if you haven't checked out the first couple episodes in the Johnny Gosch podcast here on MINDSHOCK, check them out, because I actually go point by point where I didn't automatically, obviously, assume Noreen was correct about anything, but just going over information, obviously, there's still much that's uncorroborated, but many pieces have been corroborated as time went on. Linking the two cases together was probably done to keep the Johnny Gosch case in the spotlight and keep the leads coming in. Hell, I probably would have done the same thing if it was one of my sons. A good way to keep your case alive is to tie it to other similar cases as the years go by. I mean, I don't see that, though. Noreen Gosch is basically looking out for other kids as well and bringing awareness to it. I mean, obviously that also overlaps with Johnny Gosch, but not necessarily. Notice that Patty Wetterling didn't tie her son's disappearance to anyone else's kidnapping or to Franklin or MK Ultra or DeCamp or Gunderson or anyone else, and neither did the Martin family. Well, the Martin family was completely, Wetterling was a bit of a distance away, and was Patty Wetterling threatened by police? Was there an active police cover-up in that situation like there was with Noreen Gosch? Again, apples and oranges here by this individual. Clearly a very illogical post, but I will finish it anyway. Think about that just for 1 minute. Just saying this case cannot be solved by looking at all these far-out conspiracy theories. Or is that the only way to solve it because nothing else has solved it? This case cannot be solved by looking at all these far-out conspiracy theories. The whole Franklin thing was a tragedy. I'm sure it really happened. I'm sure Larry King has skeletons in his closet, but most politicians do, and that doesn't mean it's tied to Johnny Gosch. It doesn't mean it isn't either. This case can only be solved by looking at who the Chester and the molesters were at the time and what witnesses saw. A lot of the folks that could have been potentially been perps are long dead, and there are only a few living people today that probably know what happened to them. Not saying they were the perps, but I bet Sikora has a pretty good idea, even if he has just heard through the grapevine. And I bet even more so Soda, because of his involvement with the program he put on. Scared, stolen children are reported every day, and he has a pretty good idea of what happened also. Wilbur Milhouse probably knew for sure as well, but he's dead now, and I doubt he was ever polygraphed at the time anyway. I'm saying we have no real idea who the perps were. I know the general consensus among many is to view the police as lazy and uncooperative in this case, according to the many watered-down documentaries. Just remember the police really have no proof of what happened to them, unless they were, of course, involved. These are good. There are good cops and bad cops. Most cops are pretty good. Some good cops have a bad leader, and they are stuck. The police, and also plenty of police are involved in conspiracies, as we keep seeing time and time again in a lot of these wrongful convictions. The police also have limited resources and can't stop everything they are doing to dump their manpower and money into solving one case. The only thing that was tragic is that the police had to wait 72 hours before they started investigating it as a missing persons case, but that was the law at the time, and thankfully Noreen did a wonderful thing to change that. Well, first of all, it actually wasn't technically the law, and also there's a difference between not pursuing actively and silencing witnesses like Orville Cooney did. I mean, this is just insanity this guy seems not to be familiar with the case that much. That's probably why they weren't in a big hurry to get to her house that morning. If it was a murder, they would have been there faster, but they had 72 hours to get there. That's why it took them 45 minutes. I'm taking a wild guess that the police worked harder than anyone who wasn't a member of the West Des Moines Police Department at the time could ever know on this case. I mean, why would he guess that? It's pretty wild indeed. Seems completely false based on Noreen Gosch doing far more than the police ever did. All the facts from this case can be found from the early days. Everything else is just a story. I urge everyone to use common sense when investigating this case and don't get sucked into all of the Gannon MK Ultra conspiracy stuff. Appeal to incredulity. This is why so many cases go unsolved, and a lot of these vast conspiracies, it's so easy for them to be ongoing because all these gullible goofs think they're completely implausible. Okay. Yellowbag responded here. At least 9 pedophiles were arrested in the Des Moines area after Johnny's kidnapping. I found newspaper photographs of all but one of the men. None looked like the man who approached me in the Ford Fairmont when I was delivering newspapers in 82. I agree with you that Johnny and Eugene were probably dead within 72 hours of their kidnappings. If Johnny was kidnapped to make pornography, how come no one has ever reported seeing him in pornography? Well, supposedly people have, but... and then various photos with videos on websites. There are some real problems with the story of Johnny's 2 a.m. homecoming. Listen to the Faded Out podcast 6 to 8. Take careful note of Noreen's account of that event in 2 separate interviews. One right after the Bonacci trial, the other done later by Ted Gunderson. See if you noticed what I noticed. And again, the words of an emotionally distraught person, again, can she possibly make some inconsistencies? Maybe. Maybe her memory is not perfect after all these years. But anyway, regardless of whether or not she made up that account, what does that have to do with anything else? I mean, Yellowbag is clearly has an agenda to steer here just by all of this intentional obfuscation. One thing what I've thought about lately, wouldn't it be counterintuitive for a pedophile to kill his victims? These 9 men apparently liked having sex with teen boys. Wouldn't kidnapping and killing a boy put an end to what they enjoyed? Well, again, if things go wrong, etc., etc., I mean, there's so many different scenarios. So this kidnapper either took pleasure in killing, or Johnny was kidnapped, as Wilbur Millhouse told me, to shut him up. When the man in the Ford Fairmont insisted I get into his car on a snowy morning, I sensed rage, not sexual desire. I could see that man killing for pleasure. If Johnny was kidnapped to shut him up, that makes sense too. Millhouse was arrested for trying to sexually entice a teen boy in 1975. Millhouse spent 30 days in jail for that, but then the Des Moines Register rehired him 3 years later to work with children. They had to have known about Millhouse's arrest because the arrest was printed in the Register in 75. Maybe Millhouse was calling Johnny and Johnny threatened to tell on him. With a second offense, Millhouse would have known he faced prison, getting his ass kicked again by fellow inmates, and the loss of his dream job working with and victimizing boys. I still don't know what the connection was between Millhouse and the Fairmont guy. Someone out there does. When that person speaks up, there is hope this case will finally be solved. Okay, this is actually one of the first posts from Yellowbag that it seems very clearly this individual has an agenda. And might possibly, I mean, I don't want to, I never accuse anybody of making up a story because he seems relatively credible in the other posts. In this post, especially saying that he sensed rage, he could see this guy killing it. Just the phrasing of it. Not, of course, he could have his sense of what happened, but the way that it was phrased, I find that a little suspect. Wow. So here is, whoa. Wow. Okay, Yellowbag did some homework here. I spent some time looking at all the sex abuse arrests reported in the Des Moines Register from 1980 to 1987. My hope is still to identify the Fairmont guy who tried to get me into his car when I was a 15-year-old newspaper carrier in 82. I know the Fairmont guy and Wilbur Millhouse, a Des Moines Register employee, were acquainted. It appears that the Des Moines police were very aggressive in going after local pedophiles after Eugene Martin was kidnapped in 1984. There were multiple home searches and arrests, and it was alleged that there were 3 child sex abuse rings targeting teen boys in the Des Moines area. Okay, this is insane. For all the goofs out there hallucinating that there are no rings out there and all of this is nonsense and it was just a sole perpetrator, I mean, 3, not 1, not 2, but 3 different rings, if that's true. I mean, obviously there were plenty of reports circulating of at least 1, but it was alleged there were 3 just by the sheer amount of individuals. This is insane. The arrested men all denied being part of a ring, but nearly all either pleaded guilty or were convicted of sexually abusing teen boys. Sam Soda's investigation alleged 3 Des Moines Register employees. 1, Frank Sikora, registered adult carrier, pled guilty. 2, unnamed, presumably Wilbur Millhouse, register circulation manager, pled guilty. And 3, an unknown individual. The Des Moines police raided 3 homes in February '86. 1, Steve Crawford, a school volunteer of the year, pled guilty. 2, Wilbur Millhouse, arrested 6 months later. 3, Robert Robbins, young man apparently not charged, died of AIDS in 2001. The Des Moines police alleged a child sex ring centered around a local witches' coven. What? Okay, so there are a lot of coincidence theorists out there that hallucinate that there are no such thing as satanic cults or any of this, when there's clearly people getting arrested for this, rings getting busted, countless newspaper accounts of all of this. I mean, it's like these goofs are so mentally weak, they just don't want to live in a world where there are cults and all this evil, so they have to pretend it's just sole individuals acting alone. I mean, coincidence theorists are a curious bunch that way. But continuing on here, 1, Davis Graham, a school teacher, the leader of the coven, pled guilty. 2, Jerry Wintz, income tax preparer, pled guilty. 3, Patrick Baird, insurance clerk, partially deaf, pled guilty. Stephen Woodcock, school teacher, convicted. 5, Larry Hoffman, declared mentally incompetent. Millhouse told me on several occasions that Johnny was kidnapped because he couldn't keep his mouth shut. I think the key to finding out what happened to Johnny is to find that person, maybe a cop, school teacher, childhood friend, Des Moines Register employee, who remembers what Johnny was saying back then and who he was accusing. You know, it's weird because there is that report of Johnny speaking to a policeman the day before at a sports game. And that policeman, for whatever reason, they really put up roadblocks for Noreen and the Gosches and PIs to find out who that cop was that Johnny was speaking to. Was Johnny Gosch blowing the whistle on somebody? Also, I found in my research that Des Moines Register rehired Wilbur Millhouse in 78. He previously worked for them in 69 and 70. That was 3 years after he was convicted of sexually harassing a teen boy by telephone. Millhouse was sentenced to jail time, forced to undergo a psych eval at Broadlawns, and the Register still hired him to work with children. Yellowbag also stated, the Emilio sketch does not resemble the man I saw in the Fairmont. The man I saw in the Fairmont was only around 25 years old, not Hispanic. Black hair, brown eyes, well-trimmed mustache. He was medium build, had a very angry look in his eyes, and he spoke with a slight accent, not a foreign accent, maybe East Coast. The thing that stood out the most to me was his bright blue and orange jacket. When I called the West Des Moines police after Johnny's kidnapping, I told them I believed it was a paramedic jacket. If the Emilio sketch looks like anyone, it was Millhouse himself. But then again, Sarah DeMeo with the Faded Out podcast found an eyewitness who was telling her that Johnny did not walk to Ashworth Road on the day of his kidnapping. That makes the Emilio sketch dubious. And here he is again trying to steer the narrative and obfuscate. It's not dubious at all. You have one unreliable witness who's giving a different report than people who specifically knew Johnny Gosch, who said he was at Ashworth. Okay. Yellowbag also posted this. I saw a photo of Jerry Wintz, but he does not look like the guy who approached me in the Ford Fairmont. The guy who approached me was not heavy like Wintz. I have seen photos of Frank Sikora, but not his brother. It looks like the Sikoras lived in the 1600 block of East Capitol. That is really close to where I was approached, around East 23rd and Grand. I would sure like to see a photo of James Sikora. The man who approached me in February or March of 82 seemed very alert, angry, and agitated for someone out and awake at 6 a.m. It was also snowing very heavily at the time. After he asked me for directions, he told me I should sit in his car to get out of the snow. My thought was that the man was coming home from work, not going to work. He did not look like someone who just woke up in the morning. I guess it's possible, too, that he was wound up because he was out hunting for a victim. I got nervous because he kept looking in his rearview mirror like he was worried about someone seeing him talk to me. I still think the blue and orange paramedic jacket and East Coast accent are the keys to the man's identity. If I remember right, it was Labor Day 82 when I called the West Des Moines police after hearing they were looking for a suspect in a Ford Fairmont. What are the chances there are two men trying to abduct paperboys who just happen to drive the same model and color car? I have not posted in a while, mostly because I have nothing to add. The only new link is that I was able to get into Milhouse's house. Wow, that's weird. I was able to get into Milhouse's house when it was for sale this spring. There was nothing in the crawl space from Milhouse's day except for old paint cans. There was an old fireworks box in the attic. This is kind of interesting because I heard from a reliable source that Milhouse sold or gave away fireworks to try to get boys to come to his house so he could molest them. I still think the truth about what happened to Johnny Gosch will come out. The Fairmont man, if he is still alive, would only be in his 60s or 70s. Someone out there is the missing piece of the puzzle. I mean, if this is all true, I mean, it seems like he really did his homework and he's actually going into Milhouse's house to see if he left anything there. That's crazy. Someone asked him about if the paramedic jacket was simply some kind of reflective vest worn by various workers. He responded, I suppose it's possible. It was snowing like crazy that morning, so he could have had any job that required a reflective jacket. Since I saw the man later with Wilbur Milhouse, a Des Moines Register circulation manager, I wonder now if any Register employees had jobs that required wearing blue and orange reflective vests. One other thing that puzzles me, the man had dark hair, brown eyes, a mustache, and an average build, just like the Emilio sketch with the article above. However, the man who tried to get me into his Ford Fairmont was only 25 to 30 years old. I don't remember thinking the man was Hispanic, just a Caucasian guy with dark hair and a very angry countenance. I distinctly recall that the man had an accent, not a foreign accent, but I got the impression he was not originally from Iowa. Maybe from New York, New Jersey, Boston, or somewhere else on the East Coast. He stopped and watched me for a while, then rolled down his window and motioned for me to come to his car. He asked me for directions to Ankeny, but then insisted I get into his car so I could get warm and he could help me finish my paper route. 6 months later, when I heard Johnny was kidnapped by a guy in a Ford Fairmont, I had no doubt it was the same man. I mean, also it's possible he's biased here because he's had a traumatic experience that closely resembles Johnny Gosch, but Don actually asked a question here. Maybe Sikora took over while Milhouse recovered from the heart attack. The key to this case is motive, and you have presented a compelling motive for Johnny's disappearance and most likely murder. However, that begs the question, why was Martin killed? Did he or was he about to expose some of the same illicit behavior Johnny mentioned? Johnny had to talk about what he knew to at least one of his parents or maybe law enforcement. Noreen's book has an interesting story at the start talking about the events leading up to the disappearance. She discusses how Johnny left his seat at a Friday night Valley High football game 2 times. And both times Leonard Gosch found Johnny talking to a West Des Moines cop under the bleachers. There's so many things that make no sense in this case, I could go on for hours. One of the strangest is Johnny's step-siblings have never been interviewed by the media, and frankly, I have no idea where they live. According to Noreen, both step-siblings were present at what she refers to as the Last Supper. The fact that both boys went along to deliver newspapers for the first time the day they disappeared speaks volumes about what happened. Okay, lot to unpack there. You know what's really tragic? If Johnny did tell his father what was going on and his father possibly knew about it, if he was involved in Franklin or some other circles possibly overlapping Franklin. I mean, this is dark stuff. Did Leonard try to dissuade Johnny Gosch from talking to the police or blowing the whistle saying it was too dangerous and Johnny didn't listen? I mean, there's just so many possibilities here and these stories that just don't go away, and it's very hard to make heads or tails out of them because there does seem to be overlapping angles here. Yellowbag responded, unfortunately, I do not have any first-hand information on the Martin kidnapping. In the summer of '83, I started to get creeped out by Milhouse calling me every night, trying to talk me into coming to his home. When I refused, I heard an anger and an evil in his voice I had never heard before. I mean, is this normal too? I mean, this teenager is getting called by this older guy every single day. I mean, do you think, does anybody think Yellowbag maybe embellished some of this story? Or maybe he's saying what he believes to be true, but from the trauma, possibly it exaggerated. I don't know. Again, I mean, all of these emotional aspects, it's difficult to obviously make any kind of conclusions here. Also, as I posted before, 3 teen boys who were visiting a girl across the street saw Millhouse dropping me off at my house after buying me a beer. The boys lived in West Des Moines and had delivered newspapers there. When Millhouse was gone, the boys warned me that Millhouse was a and that I ought to stay away from him. I stopped answering my teen line phone, and I told my mother to tell Millhouse I was not home every time Millhouse called our home phone. Around that time, I also had a vivid nightmare that Millhouse tried to drag me into his car. I took that as a warning from God or my subconscious that I ought to stay away from Millhouse. See, I don't know. Posts like this seem very credible, and yet some of his other posts seem like he's intentionally steering a narrative. I don't know. It's kind of... I mean, is this even the same person posting under Yellowbag here? I mean, that's... Again, I don't know. I do not know this until recently, but I spoke with my mother about Millhouse, and she actually remembers him showing up at our house one night when I was not home, shedding crocodile tears because I quit talking to him. Around that time, Millhouse had his heart attack. I turned 16 and had a car, so that fall I was able to find a better job and leave the Des Moines Register. This is kind of weird. So his Des Moines Register boss shows up at his house crying, and the mother didn't think that was that strange? What? Last night, I was able to confirm through online research that Millhouse died in 2015. He is buried in the Leavenworth National Cemetery with a military headstone that mentions his Vietnam service. In some ways, I am disappointed Millhouse is dead. I had hoped an investigator would get a chance to question Millhouse about what happened to the missing paperboys. It also steams me that Millhouse was buried with military honors. I am a combat vet myself. I don't care if Millhouse killed 100 enemy soldiers or saved his army platoon. After the war, Millhouse was a convicted pedophile and admitted accessory to kidnapping at best, and possibly a serial killer at worst. That ought to negate any military service he had. His body should have been disposed of in a trash dumpster. My best guess is that Millhouse was the brains of the Register's pedophile ring, and that the Ford Fairmont guy was the muscle. There were several other Register employees who hung around with Millhouse. One in particular I will just call Slimy Doofus Guy. I cannot remember his name. Since Johnny's kidnapping happened 35 years ago, Fairmont Guy should only be around 60, Slimy Doofus Guy 55. There must be multiple people out there who know exactly who Millhouse hung out with and what happened to Johnny and Eugene. Hopefully one of them will read these posts and speak up. Don responded here. Lou Cook took Johnny for an airplane ride over the Des Moines area as the reward for winning a sales contest. Did you ever deal with Cook or Charles Edwards Jr., who was the circulation director at the Register during the time Johnny disappeared? See, again, all these little details. So not only was Johnny he wasn't just one of the paper boys, he won a sales contest. So the older executives were specifically familiar with Johnny. They even took him on an airplane ride over Des Moines. Wow. I mean, that leads more credence to this possibly being some kind of Des Moines Register cover-up, because Johnny Gosch is specifically known to upper management and all these older executives. Another interesting post by Don here. Millhouse was about as tall as Johnny, but weighed 10 pounds less than Johnny. I remember driving back to Des Moines from St. Louis several times, and there was no development around 4 Mile Creek. You are correct, the perp had little time, but he did have 45 minutes before sunrise. On September 5th, 82, the sun rose, of course, but thick clouds darkened the sun's entrance into the day. I'm thinking more along the lines of a remote area back then that no one would walk through, such as what is now 4 Mile Creek Park near Easton Boulevard or Strasser Woods State Preserve. The Bottoms works as well, since it is near the Des Moines River. The fact that both Johnny and Eugene Martin did not leave any evidence of a struggle tells me both boys got into a car driven by someone they knew. I have read about the Morris murder and read Millhouse's Register quote. Wait a second, though. If they were... I mean, what kind of sign of a struggle would there be if they were tased or possibly just grabbed and thrown into a car by 1 or 2 grown men? I mean, how much of a struggle would there be? Yellowbag responded, "The reason I suspect the Bottoms is that Milhouse tried to get me to drive out there at night and meet him behind his house. I see now that there are some houses behind his house, but that may not have been the case back in the early 80s. There has been a little bit of development in that area. I may drive out there sometimes and take a look." One other thing that puzzles me is why Johnny and Eugene were both kidnapped on Sunday mornings. The Sunday morning newspaper routes were completely separate from the Register weekday routes. When I started delivering newspapers, the Des Moines Tribune came out in the afternoon, so there were actually 3 separate newspaper routes in each neighborhood. The Tribune, the Weekday Register, and the Sunday Register. One carrier could take all 3 routes if he were ambitious, or it could have been 3 different carriers. I can only speculate, but the Sunday newspapers were very heavy. It was impossible to carry a full route of Sunday newspapers in our yellow bags. Unlike the weekday newspapers, the Sunday papers were dropped off in front of the carriers' houses. We had to take them indoors and actually assemble the newspapers. Since the Sunday newspapers were so heavy, it was best to stage them along the route, then go back and deliver them. If the kidnappers were Register employees, which is what I believe, then they may have offered the carriers rides to help stage bundles of newspapers along the routes. During weekday routes, there would be no reason to offer or accept a ride. Wow. That's an interesting thought there. Also, I wouldn't rule out Mark Allen's abduction just because he was not a newspaper carrier. Milhouse had a heart attack in 83 and stopped working for the Register at that time. When Milhouse was arrested in 86, he apparently was using some kind of telephone chat line to meet teenage boys. Losing his job with the Register changed Milhouse's approach to his sexual crimes. I took the time this morning to read Eugene's page on this website. The detective in the case questioned why no newspaper carriers were kidnapped between Johnny in 82 and Eugene in 84. Remember, Milhouse almost died from a heart attack in 83. It took him a year to get back on his feet. Another pretty startling coincidence. Don responded, "A poster on another forum spent considerable time researching a timeline to the attempted abductions of Des Moines Register paperboys after Gosch and Martin. Milhouse went to prison, and shortly thereafter the attempted abductions stopped. Research I have performed indicates Noreen at one time believed the Register was protecting an employee who was considered a pedophile. I wonder if the employee was Milhouse." Yellowbag responded, "From what I remember, Wilbur Milhouse was very angry about being transferred from West Des Moines to the 4-mile area of East Des Moines shortly before Johnny was kidnapped, in 82. Milhouse did not tell me why he was transferred, but he did tell me he had fallen out of favor with Register management and that his job was in jeopardy. Milhouse asked me to help him with a little scam in which Milhouse would pay me to gather names and addresses of Register non-customers, offer them to the newspaper at no charge, record them as new customers to temporarily inflate Milhouse's circulation numbers, then gradually cancel the new customers later. Milhouse paid for these newspapers out of his own pocket so he could keep his job. Milhouse told me that he was not Johnny's direct supervisor, but that he knew Johnny because Johnny delivered newspapers in an adjacent district in West Des Moines. Milhouse told me on more than one occasion that Johnny was kidnapped because he couldn't keep his mouth shut. Milhouse became visibly agitated and angry when talking about Johnny Gosch. This is pure speculation on my part, but I wonder now if Milhouse's transfer had something to do with the Register finding out that Milhouse was a pedophile. The Register may have been shuffling circulation managers in the 80s the same way the Catholic Church shuffled abusive priests. Milhouse was a big moneymaker for the Register. I googled Milhouse's name and found an old Register page from, I believe, 79 or 80, reporting that Milhouse was Circulation Manager of the Year. It has never been publicized, but I now suspect that Johnny either told someone or planned to tell someone about Milhouse, or one of Milhouse's Register associates grooming or trying to sexually abuse him. Milhouse's anger toward Johnny may have been due to the fact that Johnny got Milhouse transferred and nearly cost Milhouse his job. I was just a teenager then, but I would imagine that many of these Register employees from the 80s are still alive and would be able to provide more information about Milhouse and the pedophile ring that existed within the Des Moines Register. Another post by Yellowbag, pretty creepy here. Just for clarification, nearly all the circulation managers I worked with as a Des Moines Register paperboy were good people. Milhouse, though, was a sexual predator who hung out with a very small group of creepy men. After 35 years, I can remember a couple of faces but no names. I distinctly remember that Milhouse brought a couple of young men, approximately 18 to 20, with him to Register functions. Milhouse introduced them as former paperboys of his. I suspect now that they were involved with helping Milhouse in his evil deeds. Another post here from Yellowbag. I am certain Milhouse was involved in Johnny's disappearance. Heck was going around back then telling everyone why Johnny had to disappear. My mother is still alive and she remembers Milhouse saying something strange about Johnny to her. What I don't know is if Milhouse was a ringleader of the Register's pedophile club or if he was just the guy who rounded up the boys for other men to abuse. I am optimistic, though, that someday the truth will be revealed and the huge mystery will be solved. Another post by Yellowbag here. This references the Morris murder from earlier. I think that if Johnny was dumped along the creek, his body would have been found long ago. Those urban streams may look desolate in places, but there are mushroom hunters, hikers, kids catching tadpoles, walnut collectors, and even homeless people frequenting those creek beds. Milhouse lived on Maury Street, right next to Dean Lake, in the area people call the Bottoms. There was not much there in the 80s other than swampy places, trees, junkyards, and slaughterhouses. In 73, David Morris, a Jewish grocer who had a store directly across from the street from Milhouse, was robbed and murdered. Morris was shot in the back of the head with a .32 caliber pistol. A neighbor named Robert Brather said that Morris was killed in the store 2 hours after it closed, and that Morris would have only unlocked that store door for someone in the neighborhood he knew quite well. Interestingly, the Des Moines Register also interviewed Milhouse, who would have been working for them at the time. Milhouse talked about how well-liked Morris was and said of Morris, "When I was little, he used to give me candy." Milhouse also revealed that he had lived in that neighborhood since 1955. I have speculated enough about Milhouse on this website, so I'm not going to type it, but you know exactly what I am thinking. If Johnny was killed to shut him up, which is what Milhouse was blabbing about right after Johnny disappeared, then it is likely the kidnapper already had a plan to dispose of Johnny's body. The sun would have come up soon after Johnny's disappearance, so the perp would have been in a big hurry to get Johnny out of West Des Moines and into a remote area like the Bottoms before daylight. Milhouse had a sexual interest in teen boys, not in younger ones. Milhouse's last sex offender mugshot showed him at 5'7" and 130 pounds. Johnny was actually bigger than Milhouse. Milhouse, though, was part of a small group of pedophiles, some of whom worked for the Des Moines Register. If Milhouse had help, possibly a gun, and maybe some previous experience with killing, well, you may find yourself writing a very interesting book. Okay, so here's the thing, though. If Milhouse really was involved, would he be blabbing about why Johnny had to disappear, unless it was like some kind of warning to the other paper boys? Perhaps in that capacity, maybe it would. Or was he just a mentally unstable individual that suspected that other people that maybe even he knew had something to do with it, even if he didn't know for sure if he wasn't involved? Robert posted this. I met Wilbur Milhouse around 71 or 72, and he was then an employee of the Des Moines Register. Rocky Bird posted this in response to Yellowbag. I found a link on Google from the Des Moines Register stating that Wilbur Milhouse was arrested for sexual abuse of 16 boys in 1987. The article states he was 44, not 25, like you remember. But you were just a kid then, and 25 and 44 might have been the same to you. That's not the same, even to a kid. I mean, a 25-year-old's like a regular man. 44 is clearly an older man. If you search Wilbur Milhouse sexual abuse on Google, you will find the article. I cannot access it as I don't have a subscription. Yellowbag responded, I had a lengthy conversation with the detective investigating this case. He promised to follow up on that information, and I trust he will. At this point, I think I have done all I can do. My information about a local pedophile who knew Johnny and talked about why Johnny was kidnapped apparently does not interest some of the international conspiracy theory buffs. So be it, I told what I saw and heard. As for Milhouse, he was not the man in the Ford Fairmont, but I saw Milhouse with that man at a Register function. Milhouse was not a big man. He was really kind of a sissy with a childlike personality. I doubt if he could have personally kidnapped a healthy teenager. Milhouse's younger buddy, however, was tough and had a look of pure evil in his eyes when he demanded that I get into his car. I still remember carrying a big hunting knife in my yellow newspaper bag from that point on, just in case the guy came back for me. For weeks, I would duck between houses anytime I saw a Ford Fairmont coming down the street. The Register held frequent circulation drives, contests, and social events for the newspaper carriers in the early 80s. I often saw Milhouse hanging out with a small group of creepy men at those functions. I never knew who they were, I just assumed they were Register employees. The other district managers tended to avoid Milhouse and his buddies. I wonder now if they suspected the guys were pedophiles. I believe Milhouse was employed by the Register from around 80 to 83, but not arrested until the fall of 86. Johnny Gosch was kidnapped in 82, Eugene Martin in 84, and Mark Allen in the spring of 86. After Milhouse was arrested and sent to prison, the kidnapping stopped. Quite a coincidence, isn't it? Or did they stop? Again, with those other cases, but... Okay. Another follow-up here by Yellowbag with some more details. A quick correction and a little bit more info about what I saw and heard in the early 80s. Thinking back, 34 years ago was a long time. When the man in the Ford Fairmont tried to get me into his car, it might have been before, not after, Johnny was kidnapped. It was snowing so he doesn't remember the exact day. It was snowing that morning, so I'm guessing it was February or March of 82. The man stopped me and asked directions. He then suggested I get in his car because it was cold and snowing outside. I started to feel uncomfortable as he insisted I get into his car. I finally asked, "Where do you want directions to?" He answered, "Ankeny." As I started to give directions, the man stopped me and said, "I really don't need directions. I just want to mess around with you." Back in the 80s, mess around meant have sex. I said no and started running away. I looked to see if I could get the license number on the Fairmont, but the plate was completely covered with snow. That September, when I heard Johnny was kidnapped and the police were looking for a man in a Ford Fairmont, I suspected it was the same person. I called the West Des Moines police, and they told me an officer would come to my house to speak with me. No one ever showed up. Really shows how seriously the police were taking the case. Or whether or not there was, of course, a conspiracy afoot. I could have identified the man by photo or provided a good description to a sketch artist. Anyway, my family had moved around that time, and Wilbur Millhouse became my new district manager for the Register. Millhouse had just transferred from West Des Moines to the east side of Des Moines. He admitted he knew Johnny, and he talked about him a lot. I thought Millhouse was a cool guy because he bought us Paperboys beer and gave us money. One day, the Register had a party for its carriers at the old Skate East. It was there that I saw Millhouse with the guy who tried to get me into his car. I later discovered Millhouse was a pedophile. I will post more on that when I have time. Shortly after Johnny turned up missing, Millhouse said some strange things to me that he convinced me he knew who took Johnny and why. I see on the internet that Millhouse was convicted in 87 of sexually abusing boys, with the police not seeming too interested, and the Register probably wanting to hide the fact that a pedophile ring existed within its employ in the 80s. It's no wonder this case has never been solved. Someone asked him why he waited so long to bring this information forward. He responded, "I really don't know how to answer your question about why I waited. I didn't want to think about it after it happened. I was afraid of Millhouse and his buddies back then. The police didn't seem to want to listen when I tried to talk to them. I figured, how can the police not know about Millhouse, especially if he was convicted of sexually abusing boys in the 80s? They must have known Millhouse worked for the Des Moines Register the same time Johnny came up missing. I left Iowa after high school and blocked the whole thing out of my mind. I recently saw news articles about the anniversary of this crime, and I guess it's finally dawned on me that I might have information worth sharing." Someone asked him why he didn't go to the police, etc., and Yellowbag responded, "You are right about no excuse. I have asked Jody to forward my information to the appropriate authorities. I guess the worst thing that could happen is finding out Millhouse was just a perv who made up what he said about Johnny to further scare me into silence." I mean, yeah, that's a possibility as well. So here's an interesting post on the Johnny Gosch subreddit by Truly Woke 111. This is what I'll call the Yellowbag Franklin theory. So I was researching this case and saw that there are two main theories, those being the Franklin cover-up and the DMR Willhouse theory. So I came up with this bigger theory that incorporates both of them along with some minor theories that actually makes sense once putting them all together. According to Yellowbag, it's been said that Millhouse kidnapped Johnny because he was speaking too much. But Paul Bonacci said that John had made arrangements with him to kidnap sell Johnny in order to pay off debts. So what if the Franklin cover-up could have been a larger network of different pedophilia child trafficking groups that were scattered across the country or even the globe, and maybe one of these groups were local to Des Moines? Wilbur Millhouse could have been part of a group along with Frank Sikora, Sam Soda, Paul Bonacci, Emilio, and more unknown pedophiles or POIs that we're unaware of, but Millhouse, Sikora, Soda, Bonacci, and Emilio being the only ones important to this case. So it's possible that Johnny could have withheld information that could have cost Millhouse his job and even planned on or already did tell someone. We even see that Yellowbag mentioned this on IowaColdCases.com website. This information that Johnny could have had more to do with him being a pedophile and him sexually harassing these young boys. Yellowbag also mentions that Millhouse said he kidnapped Johnny because he couldn't keep his mouth shut. This leads me to believe that Millhouse and the other group members could have orchestrated a plan to kidnap Johnny, but in order for that to happen to John, who went with him on all of his routes, could not be present. So that's when they called the Gosch residence and would only reply if John answered, and could have forced John into a deal where he would have had to give up Johnny, promising him an undisclosed amount of money to help pay debts if he were to remain silent, and could have threatened to harm him or his family if he didn't comply. This would explain the frequent phone calls the Gosch residence was receiving, and John would answer these calls and claim that they were prank calls and that the person on the other line would remain silent. I think they could have been speaking the whole time, and John refused to say anything to anyone, knowing the consequences he could face by doing so. And he knew that it would send Noreen, Johnny, and the rest of their family and friends into a panic. That's when they called him the night before and told him how everything would go down, to stay in bed and to act surprised, shocked after the kidnapping. Milhouse and Sikora, who we now know works for the Des Moines Register, could have known the route Johnny was taking and could have transferred that info over to Emilio, Paul Bonacci, Sam Soda, and possibly others. That's when Paul and Emilio, who Paul claims was the ringleader, could have used the Fairmont to kidnap Johnny. Then they transfer him into another vehicle with Sam Soda and Emilio, where he is then taken to a farmhouse. Then sold to a man known as the Colonel, but is really Colonel Michael Aquino. Aquino specialized in psychological warfare and started a satanic church known as the Church of Set. You know what's crazy, too? Like, all the coincidence theorists, the authority-worshipping cultists, all these gullible goofs who think that cults don't exist and none of this satanic occult stuff exists. I mean, Michael Aquino actually went on talk shows on mainstream television. Like, it's not like this is some kind of weird allegation. Like, he openly admitted it on live TV. I mean, it's insane. And the gullible goofs just, I guess, pretend Michael Aquino doesn't exist. They got away with this simply because they were working alongside the government and law enforcement, which allowed them to get away with this. I personally don't think that the Des Moines Register was an underground pedophilia cult, but rather was a place where pedophiles worked so then they could gain access to young teenagers. This can explain why Eugene Martin's kidnapping was so similar to Johnny's. As for Mark Allen, although I think he was also something done by people connected to the Franklin cover-up and was probably more random due to the fact that he wasn't a paperboy and was just probably at the wrong place at the wrong time. Yellowbag even mentions that the creepy group Milhouse would hang around were former paperboys of his. Maybe those were also paperboys who were also kidnapped by him and the pedophilia group local to that area. Paul even mentioned how he lived in Iowa at one point, so you never know. There were even some failed kidnapping attempts done on paperboys in the area as well. Maybe these were planned by Milhouse and the group, but just didn't work out. Them being alive is possible in this scenario, but they would probably be in hiding, considering that elite and high-profile individuals were involved in this case. Therefore, they more than likely wanted individuals under a different alias or identity than either they've taken themselves or that the government gave them to hide the truth. There's also a Twitter account that goes by the name of Johnny Gosch and claims that he has undergone experimentation by the CIA and was put into a section of MKUltra known as Project Monarch, which he claims gave him DID. Paul Bonacci mentions this in an interview. Everyone has many different theories, but I personally believe in this one because it makes sense. I recommend that you guys watch the Johnny Gosch YouTube channel and go under the favorites playlist and you will find some useful information on this case. Please let's spread awareness on this case. Mary on number 1 responded, I agree with your analysis and have maintained for a while that having to choose between local pedophiles and the Franklin connection is a false dichotomy. Bonus points! That is indeed a false dichotomy. From the very beginning, Paul Bonacci indicated that the kidnappers, Emilio and Tony, had a Des Moines contact named Sam, who gave them information on the particular victim, Johnny, who they would be taking. That included a photograph of Johnny, which was picked out of a larger collection of photos of DMR paperboys, strongly indicating that Sam had a connection with local predators who were keeping tabs on Des Moines paperboys to target. Knowing exactly where to go to find Johnny that morning, it also suggests that knowledge of his paper route was provided to the kidnappers, like you say. And Sam has, of course, been identified as Sam Soda, a highly suspicious local man who was on the Gosch family's radar as a suspect even before Bonacci came forward. Among other things, Sam lied about the Gosches hiring him to investigate Johnny's abduction when in fact he inserted himself into the case. Lied about Mary Bach being in the room with him during the interrogation of Frank Sikora when Bach herself told Sarah DeMeo, who was too incompetent and or agenda-driven to realize this contradicted a key claim by her star witness Sam. Enjoyed law enforcement protection for showing child pornography at public conferences that were attended by Des Moines cops. The first assistant county attorney responsible for that, Ron Wheeler, later went on to defend Sam in private practice when Sam beat his teenage stepson. Wow, that's insane. Was supposedly pursuing a ring of multiple DMR pedophiles who Frank Sikora collaborated with, but unceremoniously dropped that aspect of his investigation. Very curious. Tried to convince Sarah DeMeo that Johnny was not targeted in advance and that Eugene Martin's kidnapping, which coincidentally he is alleged to have predicted in advance, according to Noreen Gosch, had no connection with Johnny. Well, how would he even know whether it did or didn't if the cases are unsolved? I mean, this is weird. I'm gonna go over another account here. This was left as a comment on MindShock on YouTube here by Rico. At the Gosch time, my friend's little brother had a guy following him on his paper route 20 miles from the Gosch abduction. We had mopeds at the time and actually chased the creep, accused him of the kidnapping, and hit his car with baseball bats. He never came around again. Who knows if we were right or not? Wow. And I mean, I couldn't find a report of any of this. I don't know, maybe it didn't make it to the paper or was reported, but I mean, that's insane. And so that just goes to show, like, how many, if that's true, how many of these other accounts are there that were never officially reported? I mean, it's crazy. So there you have it. I mean, something that just does not get enough attention in the Johnny Gosch case are just this plethora of other attempted abductions. Hope everybody found another edition of MindShock True Crime interesting and informative. If you want to help support the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. You can also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Help support the channel that way. Make sure to subscribe, like, and share. Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.